Ladies and gentlemen, men and women, boys and girls. Shout out to my LGBTQ family. Shout out to all my gay dudes, my lesbian chicks, my bisexuals, and shout out to my transgender family. I'm your host, and my name is Professor Khalil Amani, and this is Khalil Amani's World 100, and we are on part 16 of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. That's right. Part 16. I'm long-winded. I'm a long stroker. I am not no 2-minute brother. When I say I'm gonna fuck you, I'm gonna fuck you. Not for 2 minutes. I use fucking as a figurative, figurative language, metaphorically speaking. I'm a long stroke you. And so we are on part 16 of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. Can you believe that? That's right. I'm feeling good today. Just came from a doctor's appointment this morning. Got my meds and we all good. I'm ready to teach. I woke up this morning ready to teach, but I had to go take care of my physical health. But now I'm home and we's ready to go in. Part 16. And if you've been following this thing from part 1 up until now, you know that I am not milking it. I just have so much information about Sodom and Gomorrah that it takes time. Part 16, 15 previous parts, each part being 1 hour and 20 minutes long. My goodness, what Bible teacher do you know on YouTube that gets it in like this? You got niggas that are doing what I call struggle doctrine. Struggle, they struggling. Struggle doctrine. They can't find information. You got a bitch nigga over there whom I affectionately call struggle doctrine. The nigga's using all my information to talk about Hebrew Israelites, showing my videos, showing the sources that I use, plagiarizing the hell out of me. Won't give me my due, but that's okay. What they say, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So when motherfuckers steal your work, steal your information, and then posit and position it as though it's their information, that just says something about the brilliance of one Khalil Amani. Now the bitch nigga named Israel Doctrine, who I call struggle doctrine, because his doctrine is struggling over there using my content and won't even give me credit. Even got my finger in one of the pictures where I'm pointing to a particular passage. Nigga won't say this is Khalil Amani's work. That's okay. But we offer him. Struggle doctrine continues to struggle. But we on part 16. And I want to share with you, I want to talk about where we left off yesterday, or part 15. In part 15, we left off talking about a law that the Jews, that the Hebrews, that the Israelites had to try to come up with and enforce, because their own people were violating like a motherfucker. See, I do curse, but my profanity is not gratuitous, and my profanity is not filler words because I'm trying to think of the next ideal to speak about. I enjoy cursing. I think profanity is quite liberating when it's done correctly and it's not laborious or gratuitous. I'm not against profanity. I'm not against cursing. As a matter of fact, one sociologist concluded that people that use profanity tend to be high IQ, high intellectual people. That's what one study says. We know that's not true across the board. There are a lot of ignorant motherfuckers that just curse like a sailor for the sake of cursing. But when profanity is used sparingly and non-gratuitously, then you may have a point. The people that tend to use a little profanity, they are high intelligent, high IQ type of people. But these motherfuckers you see on YouTube, the pissy gwizzies, the so-called king and queens, oh no, they're not a part of the high IQ class. They just ignorant motherfuckers that need profanity to kill dead space in their videos. But let's get back to what we're talking about. And that is Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter. In Deuteronomy 23 is the first time that the Sodomites are introduced after the Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot narrative. I've explained it in parts 14 and parts 15 that it's God's fault that the Sodomites are fucking with the Jews in Deuteronomy. Because God had a chance to annihilate and to extinguish the Sodomite deoxyribonucleic acid, aka the DNA of the Sodomites. God had a chance to rid the earth of the Sodomite ideology by destroying all 5 cities. But God doesn't. He leaves one of the cities of the Sodomites unhindered. He left them alone. The city of Zoar. Fact check me if you must. Z-O-A-R, Zoar. The 5th city in league, in confederate with the other cities of the plain that was slated for destruction, yet was spared because Lot and his 2 daughters left Sodom and went to that city. They would eventually go to the mountains, which was opportune time for God to do what he said he was going to do earlier. But God must have forgot, and he left Zoar alone. And Zoar, these people that were great adulterers and great fornicators and great child abusers and great pedophiles and pederasties, they were in the bestiality. They were in the homosexual acts. They were in the heterosexual acts called adultery. Heterosexual acts called fornication. They were in the pederasty, which is grown men butt fucking young boys. That's not homosexuality. That's called pederasty. They were in all kind of sexual licentiousness and sexual lasciviousness. And so Zoar even though it was as bad as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, the other 4 cities of the plain, it was spared at Lot's expense. That's in Genesis. 700 years later or so, from the time of Abraham to Moses, some say 400 to 700 years later, Moses and the Levitical priests have to deal with an issue that God failed to finish. That is the destruction of the Sodomite movement. So from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, 5 books later, the Sodomites have risen and reared their ugly head. And the Sodomites have become such a problem that the Levitical priests, the Jewish priests, the Hebrew priests, the Israelite priests, they have to speak on it. They have to write about it. They have to add a law concerning the goddess and the Sodomite. They have to put a law up as one of their 613 laws, statutes, judgments, and commandments. And so we read in Deuteronomy 23:17 that there shall not be a whore amongst the daughters of Israel, nor a Sodomite amongst the sons of Israel. Now, if this is your first video, it's the first time you came over here, the first time you found Professor Khalil Amani, your first time watching any of these videos, you pop over here on episode 16. First time. I tell you, you should go back to part 1 and then come to part 16 after you do the first 15 parts. But, as I always say, if you're a Billy Badass and you think you know Bible, jump your ass right on in here. But I have a 1-question litmus test to see if you are worthy of coming over here for the first time and jumping right into part 16. And that 1-question litmus test is this. Do you see Sodom and Gomorrah, the narrative? Do you see it as God's punishment for homosexuals and homosexuality? That's it. And if you answer yes, if you believe that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah was simply a matter of God killing faggots, excuse my expression, that's what they say. That's what the world says. They call my LGBTQ people faggots. Even though we know a faggot is simply a bundle of sticks that may be burned at a campfire. But if you see the narrative about Sodom and Gomorrah as one of God's destruction of a homosexual city who engaged in homosexual practices, if that's what you think, then I can tell you 1000% you're wrong as fuck, you're wrong as 2 left shoes, and you need to take your ass back to part 1 and catch up. You're just wrong. You believe what the world teaches you. You believe what Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Islam, you believe what these Hebrew Israelites have lied to you about. The whole world has lied about it. So if you believe that, and this is the first video you're watching, you're so far behind that it ain't even funny. But if you don't want to go, stay. But But I guarantee you, any question you have, I've answered it between part 1 and part 15. But stay. If this is your first time and you don't want to start, you want to start here, then stay here. Stay here. Maybe watching this video will encourage you to want to go back and check out the series from the beginning. But I guarantee you, I teach Sodom and Gomorrah like no other on the planet. You have never heard Sodom and Gomorrah taught as I teach it. I don't care what Bible teacher you want to name. None of them have brought the information on Sodom and Gomorrah that I have brought and continue to bring. None of them. Barring nobody you know. On YouTube or off of YouTube. Nobody is fucking with this subject like I'm fucking with it. Excuse my profanity. But I want to go back and deal with the fact that 5 books, some 700 years after Abraham and Lot, the 2 angels, Sodom and Gomorrah, and God destroying those cities, 700 years later, we come down to the prophet Moses. And Moses has to deal with the same issue that Abraham and Lot dealt with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam, and Zoar. That the Sodomites have increased in their numbers. They are into the hundreds of thousands, yea, they're into the millions. And they are a factor in everyday Jewish society and Jewish life. That the Sodomites are a force to be reckoned with. Facts upon facts. The Sodomites are a force to be reckoned with. Some 700 years after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, here they go again, the Sodomites. Why are the Sodomites still in everyday Hebrew or Jewish or Israelite life? Why are they? We talked about it in part 15. That the goddess Asherah, that the god Baal, that the goddess religion and the Sodomite religion was far more exciting, far more approving, far more fun and exciting than the old, antiquated, archaic, stale Israelite law. And the children of Israel, they saw in the goddess and in the Sodomite religion, they saw happiness. They saw purity and wonderfulness. They saw sexual release and sexual gratification. Because as I've been teaching in goddess religion and in Sodomite religion, they use sex, S-E-X. They use sex, heterosexual sex, bisexual sex, and even homosexual sex. They use these sexual practices as a way to show veneration and adoration towards the deity. The goddess Asherah, the god Baal. You cannot judge a nation or a culture's understanding of divinity through your 21st century worldview. You cannot judge where these people were on the evolutionary chain of progress towards the divinity. You can't do it. It's historically, spiritually, and religiously unfair to judge how these people, how those people thought about how to praise God, how to worship God. And so circa 2000 BCE, going back to 25,000 BCE, the goddess was ever present, and sex was its ultimate show of worship and ritual. Having sex with women and men that were part of the temple, that's how they gave it up. And you can't judge that. You can never judge another people's evolutionary understanding of the divine. It might sound weird, wacky, and silly to us in the 21st century that people would go into a temple, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, and fuck and suck people that were enlisted to do the fucking and sucking, and they'd come out of there thinking, I just honored the deity. Yes, it sounds weird to us today, but at the sake of being redundant, you cannot judge a nation or a people's understanding of God in their period, in their epoch, in their stage of religio-spiritual growth. You can't do it. It's wrong to do it. And so when we go back to Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, we find among the Jewish, we find among the Hebrew, we find among the Israelite writings of their laws a prohibition concerning the whore and the sodomite. And as I've explained in parts 14 and 15, if you are reading that scripture using modern English of the 21st century, when you read whore, you think prostitute. When you read sodomite, you think homosexual. But I say to you, again, at the sake of being redundant, the law of Deuteronomy 23:17 had nothing to do with prostitution or homosexuality. Let's just read it, and then we're going to deal with it. Because what I want to do in this thing is I want to clear up the notion and the language of the Jewish people, of the Hebrew people. And so in Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, verse 17, it writes, "There shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel." Now, if you have not studied the scripture and you just see the word whore, you know a whore is somebody that gets paid for sex, generally a woman, i.e. today we call them prostitutes. Sodomite, when we see the word sodomite, we tend to think homosexual. And so in your misreading of the law of Deuteronomy 23:17, you read this as, "There shall be no prostitute of the daughters of Israel, nor a homosexual of the sons of Israel." Well, if you read it that way, you're 1000% wrong. That this verse has nothing to do with prostitution or homosexuality. That's right. And so in parts 14 and 15, I take you to Exhibit A, which is The Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible that has commentary on what we just read. I said that law has nothing to do with prostitution or homosexuality. And so Exhibit A, we're going over this, but we're going to go past it. Exhibit A, concerning this scripture that you might think is talking about prostitution and homosexuality, we go to Exhibit A, which is the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, volume Q, K through Q, and we go to page 933, and it gives us some insight on what it's talking about. I said in page 933, we go down here to the female prostitute, and it says the law of Deuteronomy. See right there, 23:17. So the law of Deuteronomy 23:17 prohibits the practice of cult prostitution by the daughters of Israel and likewise the sons of Israel. So there's some type of practice going on. Are they practicing being prostitutes? No. Are they practicing being homosexuals? No. That don't even sound right. You don't practice to be a prostitute, and you don't practice to be homosexual. You either are a prostitute or you're not. You're either a homosexual or you're not. Those aren't things you practice being. And so when it says prohibits the practice, you got to look at this word here, cult. Cult prostitution. Well, what is cult prostitution? First, we have to understand what is a cult, which we've already shown that also by simply going, where's it at? Oh, by simply going to any old dictionary. In this case, we use American Heritage to look at the word cults. And then we will get an understanding of what cult prostitution is. And they were practicing it. So let's look it up. And when we look up the word cult, cult tells us a system or community of religious worship and ritual. A religion or religious sect. See? And so now we're talking about worshiping God. Maybe not the right God, but worshiping a God nonetheless. So when you talk about a cult, you're talking about a system or community of religious worship and ritual. A religion or religious sect. Okay, we did that. Now, so when we go back and we read the law of Deuteronomy 23:17, it prohibits the practice of cult. What is a cult? A cult is a system of religion. The practice of religious prostitution, not secular prostitution, not any old walk in the street hoe prostitution, but religious prostitution. Therefore, it says down here, Deuteronomy 23:17, this law may reveal the non-Israelite origin of this institution associated as it was with the Canaanite and Babylonian fertility. Fertility means sex, if you didn't know. Fucking and sucking. The Canaanite and Babylonian sex cult. That's what fertility means. See? The Canaanite and Babylonian fucking and sucking cult. That's what fertility means. Fertility means to make babies. See? And so when you go back to this, we now understand that when we read Deuteronomy 23:17, and it says, there shall be no whore, it's really saying there shall be no religious prostitute of the daughters of Sodom, and there shall be no religious sodomite of the sons of Israel. So the question remains. Are we talking about prostitution No. Are we talking about homosexuality? No. We're talking about a religious practice by the goddess, a religious practice by the Sodomites. And in that religious practice, they just so happen to use sex, S-E-X, as ritual and worship. Do you see that? Do you see that? Maybe this may further explain why the Israelites would write a law condemning homosexuality in Leviticus. Maybe they wrote a law against homosexuality for men because they are trying to tie it up and shore it up and bridge the gap between man-on-man sex and Deuteronomy 23, where you have ritual, spiritual, religious sex. Maybe the laws concerning homosexuality in the Old Testament, maybe they come with some religious veil that we don't know about. Maybe you were starting to see that maybe, just maybe, the laws condemning homosexuality was that Leviticus, got it written down here. The laws concerning homosexuality, they're written in what? I wrote them down somewhere here. Yeah, let's see. Well, we can look them up. Leviticus 18:22, something like that. Whatever it is. Whatever it is. Now let's just do it right now. Let's just do it right now. So we'll have them. We'll just pull them up right now. So we'll have those two laws. What are the laws concerning homosexuality in the Old Testament?
The Old Testament contains laws interpreted as prohibiting certain homosexual acts, particularly in Leviticus, verses 18:22 and 20:13. These passages forbid a man from having sex with another man.
Okay.
However, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is also linked to homosexuality, though some scholars argue the primary sins were social injustice and inhospitality.
Oh!
Interpretations vary, with some focusing...
Okay. So now when we get to understand that sex was part of the goddess tradition and sex was part of the Sodomite tradition in the worship of their own deities, Asherah and Baal, now we start to look at Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13, man shall not lie with man. Now we start to be circumspect. Now we start to side-eye those scriptures. Now we want to know what's behind this ideal that the Israelites didn't like man-on-man sex. What's really going on here? Because Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13, the laws condemning homosexuality, could they have religio-spiritual connotations? And I submit to you that in fact and indeed they did. I submit to you that the only reasons that Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13, the law condemning homosexuality, were written not because the Israelites were just against same-gender loving people, that the Israelites were simply against homosexuality. I submit to you that there's a backstory to those scriptures, and I submit to you in that backstory we find a religious problem, not a sexual problem. I've known this shit for over 30 years. When I wrote my first book, I had already peeped game as to why the Bible condemns homosexuality. And it wasn't for the sake of homosexuality. But that's another story, and I don't want to get pushed off on that. I want to deal with this word prostitute. I want to deal with it. Because when you read even my books, the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Urban's Bible Dictionary, Oxford Bible Companion, what you find when you read Judeo-Christian commentaries on biblical prostitution, what you find, as great as these books are, as great as these are for references, they are in error whenever they use the word prostitute or prostitution. As great as these sources are, they are biased and they are ethnocentric, and that they speak in the language of the Jews, of the Hebrews, of the Israelites about other nations' religious and spiritual belief systems. And that's a grave, grave injustice. What the English writers of these Bibles, encyclopedias do is that they write from the standpoint of the Israelites and how the Israelites viewed the Canaanites, not how the Canaanites viewed themselves sexually. And that's a grave injustice. Are you following me? Are you following me? And so, Bible historians, Bible scholars, English scholars, Judeo-Christian scholars, they are biased and they are not writing truly, authentically the way it was. They are writing from the perspective of how the Jews viewed Canaanite religion. They are writing from the perspective of how the Israelites viewed Canaanite and Sodomite religion. They are not asking the Canaanites themselves. They are not asking the Sodomites themselves, how do they view the ideal of sex for money as worship and ritual to the deity? They don't ask the actual participants. And that's a crime. And that's where most of us, that's where we err. That's where we get it fucked up. And so, I don't care what Bible encyclopedia you pick up, Unger's Bible Dictionary, Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, the Oxford Bible Companion, the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, all of these Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias, when it comes to the Canaanite religion, they got it wrong and they used the wrong word. For the word prostitute or prostitution should never have been used. Hello?
Hello?
It should have never been used. It should have never been used. So you probably say, well, who is you, Khalil? Who is you that all of these scholarly books and dictionaries and encyclopedias, they call it cult prostitution? Who are you to come along and say they're all wrong? I am me. And I have the evidence that they're wrong. Okay? So let's just start with, well, let's just go back. This ideal that there were so-called cultic temple prostitutes is a bad ideal and a bad rendering of what was really going on by the Goddess and the Sodomites. It's bad historicity, to say the least. An example of how bad it is, imagine you as an English-speaking person, born in America, you take a trip over to China, for example, and you see some religious practice that looks crazy as fuck to you. Say you go to India and you see how the Indian people up in India, how wonderful they treat cows. And you go, goddamn, we eat cow every day. We eat cows, burgers and steaks. And they're washing the cows. They're praying to the cows. They're treating the cows better than they treat themselves. And it looks weird to you. Crazy. You go to certain parts of Africa and you watch some of the tribal religions walking on fire, eating penis. Weirdo shit. Or you look at the ancient European Jews, Ashkenazi and Sephardic, the Orthodox white European Jews today. And you watch a little Jewish boy being born, and you see a Jewish man go down between that newborn infant's legs and bite the foreskin off of that baby's penis. Swallow it or spit it out. But a man just put his mouth on a newborn baby boy's penis. You see the practice and you go, goddamn, what the fuck? And then you go back to America and you write about what you saw the Jews do. You write about what you saw in China. You write about what you saw in India. You write about what you saw among the African tribes in their spirituality and religious practices. Stuff that you thought was crazy as fuck. But you never asked those people, can they interpret what they are doing for your American audience? You as an American simply start writing the histories and the religiosity of those nations from the framework, from the worldview, from the mindset of your American mind. And in doing so, you start labeling the biting off of the foreskin of a Jewish baby boy. You start labeling it as sucking cock and pedophilia and pederasty and child molestation, child sexual molestation. That's what you saw. Are y'all getting what I'm saying? Your interpretation of the Jewish practice of biting the foreskin off of a newborn baby boy is strange to you. And you go back and you write that the Jews suck the cocks of the newborn baby boys. That the Jews bite off the head of the penis of the newborn Jewish boys. That's what you see. That's how you interpret it. You don't ask the Jewish priests, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is this a sexual thing? Is this about sex and arousal? You don't ask for the Jewish explanation. You don't ask the Indian why the cow is sacred. You don't ask the African tribal religious chief why he walks through fire, why he masturbates a teenage boy to bring him to orgasm so that he may become a man. You don't ask them why they do it. You just go back to America and you write about their religio, spiritual beliefs and practices, and you put your own ethnocentric, biased, bullshit slant on what they're doing. And no doubt when you write about it, you write about it very, very negatively. Well, that's exactly what the Jews, what the Israelites, what the Hebrews did when they observed Canaanite religion and Sodomite religion. That's exactly what they did. Because there were women and there were men and young teenage boys and girls in these Sodomite and goddess temples whose purpose was to serve the temple and to perform sexual acts on the parishioners, on the members, on the congregation when they came. And only thing that the members, that the parishioners, that the congregation had to do when they entered the Sodomite temple and the goddess temple was to bring something like a tithe or an offering. Don't come empty-handed. Bring gold, bring silver, bring diamonds or pearls. Bring money. Bring something of substance as a tithe and an offering to the goddess Asherah. Bring something to show your honor to the god Baal. And so what you have are the Jews interpreting the actions of other people and trying to define Canaanite and Sodomite ritual and worship through their own worldview and through their own lens. And when they do that, they misinterpret and they castigate and denigrate the practices of the Sodomite and the Canaanite as prostitute. They throw a negative connotation. Now let me give you some scholarly stuff to back up what I just said. I said all of the Judeo-Christian commentaries, encyclopedias, and Bibles, they all use that word cult prostitution. We don't have a problem with the word cult because cult is defined as a system of religious beliefs and ritual and worship. We got that. But what they do is after cult, they add words like prostitution. That it was cultic prostitution going on. It was ritual, it was religious prostitution. And I say that's a misreading of what was going on back then. And that's an ethnocentric bias on the part of the writers that would use words like prostitution to talk about other nations' religious practices, namely the goddess and the sodomite. And so we read. Right here in the Urban's Bible Dictionary, as great of a Bible dictionary this is, I love Urban's Bible Dictionary, but on this one point, calling the Canaanite and the Sodomites prostitution, Urban's Bible Dictionary is wrong as two left shoes. Let me show you. And sure enough, they have an entry for the words cult prostitute. See? What is a cult prostitute? We know from reading already that a cult is a system of religious worship and ritual. We just read that in the dictionary. So you could change cult and say religious prostitution, spiritual prostitution. Okay? And what is cult prostitution? Personnel associated with pagan temples. That's another word that shows an ethnocentric bias. The pagans never called themselves pagans. That's a title that the Israelites put on the backs of the Canaanites, just like the Canaanites put Hebrew on the backs of Abraham's people. Personnel associated with pagan temples for the purpose of what? Ritual intercourse. The word ritual, that's a religious word. It doesn't say sexual intercourse. It doesn't say fucking and sucking just for the hell of it. It doesn't say homosexual intercourse. It doesn't say heterosexual intercourse. It doesn't say carnal or worldly intercourse. It says ritual intercourse, whereby it's talking about religion. It's talking about sex, done in the name of religion, sex done in the name of a goddess, sex done in the name of a god known as Baal of the Sodomites. And so a cult prostitute, that's a Jewish word, that's a Hebrew phrase, that's an Israelite phrase. That is not the words that those people use for themselves. But from the Judeo-Christian mind, looking at what those people are doing and giving it a negative connotation by using the word prostitute when they were not prostitutes at all. Personnel associated with pagan temples. A temple is a place you go to worship God. The right God, the wrong God, but a God nonetheless. A cult prostitute are personnel, people who are associated with pagan temples for the purpose of ritual sexual intercourse. Why? Generally to appease the gods and ensure fertility. See? According, here it goes, the same scripture we've been talking about, according to Deuteronomy 23:17, which we read in parts 14, parts 15, and we read it in this now in part 16. Same scripture, according to Deuteronomy 23:17, Israelites were forbidden to engage in cultic or religious prostitution with either male or female prostitutes. KJV calls them sodomites or whores, as encouraged in the worship among some of the neighboring nations. Check this out. That the Israelites could not resist yielding to such temptations is evident from 1 Kings, which mentions male cult prostitutes during the reign of Solomon's son Rehoboam. Goddamn. Reading down further, that ritual prostitution was brought under control. 2 Kings 23:7. Don't worry, we're going to show those verses. Even mentions rooms or houses to accommodate cult or religious prostitutes in the temple at Jerusalem. Wow. This all goes back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Erdman's Bible Dictionary tells us that the Israelites, you Hebrew Israelites, your foreparents, they could not resist the temptation. That the Israelites could not resist yielding, slowing down, stopping their wantonness to get fucked and sucked by the Asherah worshippers and by the Sodomite Baal worshippers. That the Israelites could not resist yielding to such temptation is evident in the book of Kings. It goes on to say in 2 Kings that the practice of goddess worship and Asherah worship and Sodomite worship and Baal worship was so out of control that rooms or houses were built to accommodate the religious prostitutes right in the temple at Jerusalem. Are y'all smelling what I'm cooking? Are you smelling what I'm cooking? But I want to continue to show you that just because the Bible and Bible dictionaries and Bible encyclopedias want to use the derogatory and disrespectful and negative word to describe what the Canaanites did religiously, what the Sodomites did religiously, they want to explain it as temple prostitution or cultic prostitution or religious prostitution, the word being prostitution. Let me show you another source. Let's go to the Oxford They are all guilty of ethnocentric and biased language when discussing the goddess worshippers and the sodomite worship. They all wrong. All of these PhDs. Shame on every PhD in this book that went ahead and went along with any talk of a prostitute or prostitution. Shame on them all. And they all have more education than me. But they're wrong. Talking about prostitution. They weren't no prostitutes. Look at the Oxford Companion to the Bible. It uses the same fucked up language. Same fucked up language of prostitute and prostitution. Here it is. What's the entry? Let's see what the entry is. See? Prostitution. But they did something, they said something that was pretty nice in here, I like. They write, it is widely assumed that some form of sacred or cultic or religious prostitution characterized by Canaanite religion. However, now this is where you have to pay attention, ladies and gentlemen. However, the language of prostitution is never used to describe cultic offices or activity in ancient Near Eastern texts outside of the Bible's polemical usage. The Hebrew term, sometimes rendered sacred prostitute, Quodessa, simply means consecrated person. Association with prostitution or sexual activity of any sort is inferred from biblical contexts and has no parallel in extra biblical texts. Let's stop right there. See? Somebody's telling the truth. Somebody's saying what I've been saying. This is what I've been saying. And so the Oxford Biblical Bible Encyclopedia, the Oxford Companion to the Bible, it gets it right. It explains that this word prostitution that's in the Bible, that's in the translations, that is bullshit. And that outside of the Bible's usage, you don't find that word prostitute in any of the extra biblical literature around the world. Oxford writes, the language of prostitution is never used to describe cultic offices or activity in ancient Near Eastern texts outside of the Bible's polemical or argumentative usage. Goddamn. Goddamn. So whenever you today, whether you're Christian, Jew, Hebrew, Israelite, or Muslim, or whatever the fuck you are, if you're talking about the Bible, Old Testament specifically, and you bring up the word prostitute or prostitution, I need you fuck niggas to understand that outside of the Bible's polemical usage of the word prostitute, you will not find the word prostitute in any extra or outside of the Bible's literature. You won't find the term prostitute in the writings of the Sumerians, the writings of the Babylonians, the writings of the Assyrians, the writings of the Egyptians, the writings of the Canaanites, the writings of the Sodomites. You never find the word prostitute in that used by those people. You know why you don't? You know why you don't find the word prostitution or prostitute among the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Canaanites, the Sodomites? You know why? Because they did not view their religio-sexual practices as prostitution. And so when anybody wants to say prostitution in the Bible, you got to know and understand that they are speaking from an ethnocentric point of view. They are speaking from a Judeo-Christian point of view. That they are speaking from a biased perspective. That they are speaking the language and the words of the Jews, of the Hebrews, of the Israelites themselves. But if you go ask the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Canaanites, the Sodomites, the Egyptians, if you ask them to interpret the language of people who perform sex in the temple for ritual and worship, they will not use the word prostitution, and they don't look at the people in the temple who are fucking and sucking as prostitutes. Isn't that a revelation? Isn't that a revelation? I got one more source. My dear sister, Merlin Stone, she knocks this conversation out the water. She knocks this conversation out the water. Merlin Stone wrote one of the greatest religious books I've ever read. One of the most prolific, eye-opening, and cutting-edge books on religion I've ever read. And I tell you people, if there's one book on religion you should read, if you never read a book on religion, or if you never read another book on religion, there's one book you should read. There's two books. The other one is Chaim Maccabees, The Myth Maker, Paul and the Invention of Christianity. That's one. But the other one is a book called When God Was a Woman, by this marvelously beautiful person, Merlin Stone. This is my second copy. Somebody jacked me for my first copy. But it was such a great book, I had to go buy it, reread it, and mark it up again. One of the most eye-opening books on religion I've ever read. When God Was a Woman. And she also addresses this ideal that what was going on among the Canaanites and the Sodomites was religious prostitution. She also takes Judeo-Christian writers, thinkers, scholars, and historians to task over the misusage, the misrepresentation, and the blatant, biased, and ethnocentric tone that makes you and used to make me believe that when I read about cultic prostitution, I thought about prostitution as I, in the 21st century, understand prostitution. Merlin Stone, she puts her foot in this like no other. Merlin Stone, this shit is like mama's cooking. Shout out to Kwame Brown. Let's read what she says about people who use the word prostitute or prostitution when talking about the men and the women that are in those sodomite temples or in those goddess temples who are there to be fucked and sucked at the divinities, at the deities' request. Yeah. I said, Merlin Stone, when God was a woman. She kills this, she tears this up about page 155, 153, 157, 156. There we go. 157. Let me walk you through it. Let's get something on here. Let me walk you through it. I got it all underlined. We'll start right here. The sacred sexual customs. How can sex be sacred? Because it is. In those days, it was sacred. It was religious. The sacred sexual customs of the female religion offer us another of the apparent ties between the worship of the divine ancestress, as it was known in Sumer, Babylon, Anatolia, as Turkey, Greece, Carthage, as Africa, Sicily, Italy, Cyprus, and even in Canaan. Now check out what it says about the women that were in the temple, in the Canaanite temple, and in the Sodomite temple, that the Jews would come along and label prostitutes. Check this out. Women who made love in the temples were known in their own language as sacred women, the undefiled. Their Akkadian name of Quadishtu is literally translated as sanctified women or holy women. Yet, the sexual customs in even the most academic studies, talk about now, today, of the past 2 centuries, the 19th and the 20th century, were nearly always described as prostitution. See? These women, these so-called temple priestesses, they were called Quadishtu in their own language. And Quadishtu means sacred women, and the undefiled and holy women. But when 19th and 20th century Bible scholars and writers and thinkers and academicians, teachers and professors, when they wrote, see, even the most academic studies of the past 2 centuries, we won't count the 21st century because we're only 25 years into it. We'll say, the 1800s and the 1900s, the past 2 centuries, were nearly always described as prostitution. How are you going to describe sacred women, the undefiled, and holy women? How are you going to describe them as prostitutes and what they were doing as prostitution? See, the sacred women repeatedly referred to as temple prostitutes or ritual prostitutes. Now here it goes. Here goes the coup de grace. Here goes the death blow. The use of the word prostitute as a translation for Quadishtu not only negates the sanctity of that which was held sacred, but suggests by the inferences and social implications of the word an ethnocentric subjectivity on the part of the writer. Goddamn. It leads the reader, you and I, to a misinterpretation of the religious beliefs and social structure of the period. It seems to me that the word prostitute entirely distorts the very meaning of the ancient customs which the writer is supposedly explaining. Shit. Goddamn. Oh, hell. This is what I do. This is what I do. I know there was a lot of big words there. But what Merlin Stone was saying is what I've been saying. If you're using the word prostitute or prostitution to talk about the religious activities of the Canaanites or the religious activities of the Sodomites, you are wrong. You're wrong. those women in the Canaanite temples, those women in the Sodomite temples, those women that were the high priestesses of the Canaanite goddess Asherah, those women that were the high priestesses of the Sodomite god Baal, they used to fuck and they used to suck the members when they came to church. Yes, facts. And the members that came to church, they gave them money, property, gold, silver, diamonds, precious gems, precious stones, horses, cows, food, clothing. They came and they used these gifts as tithes and offerings. And in return, the people received blowjobs, cunnilingus, pussy eating and dick sucking, coitus, sexual intercourse. They received blowjobs. They got their backs blown out. They was fucking and sucking. That's what these temple priestesses were doing. But did they look at it like we look at prostitution? No. Did they call it prostitution? No. Did they look at having sex with the members of the church as nasty, evil, despicable, licentious, or lascivious? Did they? No, they didn't. Whenever a priestess, young girl, these women in the temple, whenever they straddled atop a dick, they were performing an act as though they were Mother Teresa. You got to, I'm not here to judge, and you shouldn't judge them. What you should do is understand their mentality, their mindset, their worldview on religion. And we know that these women that was giving up the poontang was sucking and fucking in the temple. We know that they thought they were doing a beautiful and holy and sacred thing by sucking and fucking the members. You know why we know? Because they gave themselves a name. Quadishtu. Some say Quadessa. Quadishtu or Quadessa. And in its Akkadian interpretation, the name Quadishtu or Quadessa, it literally meant sacred women, the undefiled and sanctified women, and holy women. You see how the Canaanites viewed themselves? You see how the Canaanite sexual practice viewed themselves? They used all of the most positive adjectives, adverbs, and nouns to describe their fucking and sucking in the temple. I'm just here to give you the information. And then comes the Bible. And then come the Levites. And then come them motherfuckers in the Bible that turn a sacred and holy practice around. Some goddamn Mother Teresas. Some nuns. Some women that have devoted their entire lives to the goddess Asherah and to the god Baal of the Sodomites. They give their lives for this worship and this ritual. They become sacred women. They become the undefiled. They become sanctified women. And they become holy women in their sexual practices. And then comes the Bible. The Bible's got it all wrong. The Bible has the Sodomites wrong. And the Bible has the goddess worshipers wrong. That's why when you look at another culture, the best thing to do is ask those people within the culture, within that nation, what they think about what they're doing. What is their meaning for it? How do they view themselves? And 100% of the time, it won't be like the way another nation views them. And so what we have effectively done is allowed the Bible to tell us, to give us their slanted and their biased and their very corrupted and bastardized view of other religions and their worship and ritual practices. You may not like the fact that these young women were fucking and sucking in their own temple, but you got to respect how they themselves viewed themselves. If you can't do that, then you ain't shit. This all goes back to the Sodomites. This is what Deuteronomy 23:17 was talking about. But what the Oxford Bible commentary lets us know is that this word prostitution, cult prostitute, outside of the Bible's polemic, outside of the Bible's argument, outside of the Bible's bastardization, outside of the Bible's ethnocentric and biased interpretation in their literature, outside of the Bible literature, you will not find any talk of prostitutes or prostitution by other nations. That language is strictly biblical. Strictly biblical. And that's why. And this is the problem. This was the problem Ooh, time to go. And this is why the Levitical priest had to deal with the Sodomites 700 years after Sodom and Gomorrah. This is why they had to write a law talking about there shall be no whore. And now when you read this, you know that the people they're talking about calling whores, you know now that in their own language and their own interpretation and their own understanding of their own religious practice, they did not see themselves as whores or homosexuals. They did not see themselves as prostitutes performing the act of prostitution. Now you understand that Deuteronomy 23:17 is the most egregious violation of another nation's religious practices. This is the grave injustice of the Bible, that it likes to tell us about other nations through the perspective and lens and worldview of the Israelites without asking those people themselves, are you niggas doing prostitution? Are you niggas whores? Are you niggas straight up prostitutes and homosexuals? The Bible wants us to swallow the Jewish, the Hebrew, and the Israelite interpretation of other nations' religious practices. You got that? I hope so. All right. We're not done. This includes 16. I still didn't get where I wanted to go today. I didn't get where I wanted to go today. But it's a good lesson. Never again should you ever say prostitute or prostitution when talking about people in the Bible. Chances are they were not prostitutes. They were simply goddess worshippers or sodomite worshippers. And they were sanctified women, holy women, set aside women. They were the nuns of their day. And they even had a name. They were called the Quedishtu. And the word Quedishtu is interpreted as holy women, as sanctified women. That's far from what you think a prostitute is. Wouldn't you say? All right, y'all. End of part 16. We'll see you back for 17.